Normally when a new book is released, I go through and I cover all the fun, interesting facts, connections, and interesting pieces of trivia the story reveals. Well, The Legends of Luke Skywalker just came out, but this book is unique. The stories being told have been passed down and are obviously exaggerated. I don't think we can say for sure what is and isn't true, so pulling out facts is a little difficult. So instead what I want to do is go over what I think might be true and do my best to separate the fact from the fiction surrounding what Luke Skywalker was up to in between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens in every story in the book. There will be spoilers ahead. The first story is a very fanciful retelling of A New Hope. While it made me laugh, there wasn't much at all I found significant about it, except at the end where it's implied that Luke sat there and listened to the entire story, which pretty much drags him, Han, and Leia's names through the mud. One bystander realizes who he is and asks why he didn't dispute the story, and Luke genuinely asks why he should. He doesn't care about his reputation as a hero. He feels that he and his friends were ordinary men and women who did what had to be done to restore freedom and justice to the galaxy. In short, he doesn't care what the rest of the galaxy thinks of him. The second story is told by a former Imperial gunner who, after becoming concussed at the Battle of Jakku, believes he saw Luke Skywalker using the Force to throw Star Destroyers out of orbit. After his ship crashes, he is assisted by an old man in the desert who helps him get back to safety. I personally don't believe much of this story. I don't think Luke was at Jakku based on other stories we've seen, but to entertain the idea, I do think it's within Luke's character to help an injured Imperial. I do not think he would use the Force to destroy multiple Star Destroyers and the thousands of people inside. But the most interesting part of the story is that a Jakku scavenger offers the mysterious old man that might be Luke a compass that was in a case labeled Pilio. Pilio is one of the planets featured in the Battlefront 2 story. If Luke's part in the game takes place on Pilio, maybe he really did first hear about it on Jakku. We might have to revisit this after the game's release. The third story was my favorite. The book strongly implies that it's being told by the actual person who witnessed it as opposed to the other stories that are at least second-hand. Luke travels to the ocean planet Luel, where the natives there have their own beliefs about the Force that they call the Tide. Luke learns from the elder of their people, and they trade some interesting dialogue. She says, "I can only wish that someday you'll also be pestered by a student as persistent to learn what you do not wish to teach." That could very well be a reference to Ben Solo. I've speculated before that Luke probably withheld some dangerous information about the Force or the dark side from his students, and that probably didn't sit well with his nephew. That's a pretty archetypal reasoning for falling to the dark side seen in many mythologies, not just Star Wars. The line could also easily refer to Rey and her struggle to convince Luke to teach her in the ways of the Force in The Last Jedi. Luke mentions that he argues with his teachers a lot. I found the present tense of that sentence to be very interesting. It could be hinting that he still speaks with Obi-Wan, Yoda, and maybe even Qui-Gon or Anakin. It could also simply mean that he argues with every new teacher, because it seems to me that he's spending a great deal of time exploring the Force and its many interpretations throughout the galaxy. The lesson he learns at the end of this story is that he is too intent on controlling the Force rather than surrendering to its will. We'll come back to this. The fourth story is about a slave colony of droids. R2-D2 is somehow captured and sent there, and Luke disguises himself as a protocol droid to break in and rescue all the droids. I think this story is probably pretty accurate as well, just because I assume droids would be better at the game telephone than organic beings. The most telling part of this story is that Luke is able to find and disable a specific electronic switch in a few dozen droids at the same time without seeing any of them, which would be an insanely precise maneuver. Basically, I think this story just serves to remind us that Luke is crazy strong in the Force. The fifth story is told from the point of view of a sentient flea that claims to have helped Luke out at Jabba's palace. This was the most absurd story of the bunch, and I don't think there's any truth to it, so we're gonna move on. The sixth and final story is about Luke and a biologist who become trapped in an exogorth. This one is kinda crazy, but also I find myself believing most of it. Inside, Luke comes across some other beings that were trapped long ago. They called themselves Mistweavers and believed in what they called the Luminous Mist. So, yet another Force-based belief system. Luke again has to learn to surrender to the Force. Two separate stories about Luke having a bit of a problem with control. Right now, I don't know how that's important, I just know that it is. Luke has a desire to control the Force and doesn't always recognize when he needs to let go. Now, these stories seem to take place before he started his own Jedi Academy, so it's very possible by that time he was different. I just find it interesting that two stories taught the same lesson. Just as a reminder, since these stories are all told from somewhat unreliable narrators, don't take anything I've said today as absolute fact. I'm just interpreting these stories as best I can, and we probably won't know if I'm correct until The Last Jedi comes out. If you want to read through the book and draw your own conclusions, consider checking it out on Audible. The Legends of Luke Skywalker audiobook is out now, and you can get it for free by clicking on the link in the description or by going to www.audibletrial.com/Star Wars Explained. If you sign up for a trial, you'll get a credit for one free book, and you can use it on The Legends of Luke Skywalker, or a number of other Star Wars books. Or get any book you want. The point is, you get a free book, and you'll be supporting the channel when you do. But that's it for today. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel to see new Star Wars videos every single day, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and consider checking out my Patreon page. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.